G'day so-and-sos and welcome to our sewing room. My name is Cathy and this is Purr, and in today's video we're going to be going over some common sewing terms and abbreviations that you might come across in sewing patterns or when you're trying to follow on with a tutorial on YouTube. So I've broken down today's video into segments so that you can sort of skip around and find what's more relevant to you. Either way, give us a like and subscribe before we get started, and let's just get cracking. What do you reckon? So let's start off with fabric. So things that you might hear in relation to fabric are raw edge, which is just the side of the fabric when you buy it, that is raw, it's not stitched down. And now also along that line is the selvage, which is that white bit and those color-coded bits. And that is just the edge of the fabric pretty much, and you want to cut off the selvage before you start sewing. And then we have the grain of the fabric, and that is how the fibers of your fabric lie. And the grain runs parallel to the selvage, so down that way. So if your pattern is telling you to cut with the grain, you would lay your pattern piece that way. If it's telling you to cut against the grain, then you would cut against the grain. Now, in relation to the grain also, we have the bias. So if I have a piece of cotton fabric and it doesn't have much stretch that way and doesn't have much stretch that way, the bias is on a 45-degree angle from the selvage. So you've got horizontal, you've got vertical, and then you've got diagonal, and the bias is on the diagonal. And look at how much more stretch we have that way. And that's why when we make bias tape, we do so by cutting on that 45-degree angle. So then we have right side and wrong side. So right side of your fabric is the pretty side of your fabric, and then the wrong side of your fabric is the backing of your fabric. Now let's talk about the difference between a seam and a hem and what a seam allowance is and why we have it. So a seam is when you sew two pieces of fabric together and you have that stitch line. You've created a seam by sewing them together. That's all it is. And then a hem is what you might see on the bottom of your jeans, where the edge of a piece of fabric is folded over and then folded over again and stitched to itself. So seam allowance is a distance between the seam where you've stitched those two pieces of fabric together and the edge, the raw edge of the fabric. So that's your seam allowance, is just that little bit of distance. You might see in your pattern that it'll call for a seam allowance of a 1/4 inch or maybe a 1/2 inch or anything in between. And that's, the pattern makers put that there for a reason. You want to follow those seam allowances so that your pattern all fits together perfectly. It might also be because the pattern maker then wants you to press that seam open and then top stitch or anything like that. So just make sure that you follow the instructions in your pattern where it says seam allowance. Now let's talk about some abbreviations that you might see in your pattern as you're trying to follow along with the pattern. So WST is wrong sides together. So it's what we talked about a minute ago with the fabric. The backing of our fabric is the wrong side. So if it says wrong sides together, take your two pieces of fabric and place them backing side to backing side. Then the opposite of that is RST, which is right sides together, which you take your two pieces of fabric and put them pretty side to pretty side. WOF, width of fabric. So that just says, like cut along the width of your fabric. Then we might have things like DST, which is double-sided sticky tape, which we use a lot in bag making. Then we have C, which is center, so the center of your fabric, and CF, which is center front, and then CB, which is center back. They're going to be, and then SA, of course, is seam allowance. So they're going to be the ones that you see most of. But if you come across something in your pattern that you're not sure of, check in the very beginning, the very front couple of pages of your pattern, and often the pattern maker will have a list of the abbreviations and what they mean. So now let's talk about some terms that you might hear in relation to when you are actually sewing at your sewing machine. So the first one is something that you'd hear me say a lot if you watch any of my videos, and that is backstitch. Backstitching is the act of just reversing a little bit at the beginning and end of your seam. So you'll start your seam, do a few stitches, and then just whack a couple of stitches in reverse, and that just locks it in place. And you should always backstitch at the beginning and the end to make sure that your work doesn't unravel, because that would suck. The next one is basting. And basting is where we use a slightly longer stitch or even hand stitch to hold two pieces of fabric together, or maybe a zipper to a piece of fabric, to hold it in place temporarily just while we do something else with that unit of pattern that we're actually making. And then we go over it again later in a later step to hold it all together. Then we have binding. Binding is where we finish off a seam. So in bag making, I might use binding if I'm making a bag where I have to sew everything together, but then the way that the bag has gone together doesn't mean that I can then turn it all inside out and hide it. So I might have raw edges showing. So I'll use binding with bias tape to then cover up all those raw edges. So think about the edge of a quilt, where you might see that really pretty edging around a quilt. That is binding that's used to cover up all the raw edges. The next one is casing, and a casing is where we form a tunnel to then put elastic through, or a drawstring. So think about a pair of pants that has a drawstring. We use that in bag making also. I've actually done a bag that you guys will see maybe in a few weeks, tutorial for that one, where we use a casing and then we put the handle through it that way. So it's a pretty easy one to just, it's a tunnel. Then we have probably the trickiest one, I think, and it's ease or ease in or easing. Now, ease in or easing is when we have okay, so say we're sewing a shirt, and the hole of the shirt for the armhole is this big, and then you make the shirt sleeve and it's this big, and you're like, hang on, that doesn't go together. It's because we have to ease it in. So if you have a look at a business shirt or a blouse, you might see that the sleeve is sort of doubled over here and there. It's just not all just completely flat all the way around. And that's where we ease in the fabric. So it might be just bunched over a little bit as we go around. And that's because, you know, we might have the hole here for our shoulders this big, but we don't want the sleeve to be that tight. So the sleeve is actually a bit bigger. In bag making, then we actually use easing in a little bit for gussets and the bottom of a bag, if we do like a flat bottom bag, where we have to ease it in around those curves. Then we have facing. Now, a piece of facing is a bit of fabric that is used to cover up or hide a raw edge. So we use this in bag making a little bit, for instance, when installing a zipper, and it's something that is used a lot in clothes making. So it's where you sew on an extra little piece of fabric and then flip it over the raw edge just to hide those edges and make everything look nice and neat and pretty. Cut on fold. Now this is something that you would have seen on some of my pattern pieces if you've ever downloaded any of the patterns that I've drawn up. Cut on fold means that you take your fabric, you fold it, you place the pattern piece on top along the fold, and it'll have cut on fold on, like on this side, it'll show you what side of the pattern to put against the fold. And then you cut out your pattern and then open it up and it's doubled and you have your big piece. Now we use that a lot because, well, I do, for example, because I want you guys to be able to print out one piece of pattern piece instead of having to print out multiple pieces and then sticky tape them all together. It's just a more efficient way of doing it. The next one is hump jump. Now, hump jumps are really useful tools to have in the sewing room. And what it is, it's just a little bit of plastic that you pop in underneath the presser foot on your sewing machine to help you get over thicker themes or little humps in your project. So hump jump is pretty self-explanatory. If you don't have a hump jump, then you can just fold up a piece of fabric and pop that under the foot to help you, or a piece of cardboard. And doing it that way is actually really good because you can actually make it to the thickness that you need. Now the next one is interfacing. And interfacing is a type of material that you put onto the back of your fabric. Sometimes it's got glue on it, sometimes it doesn't. And for me in bag making, it helps me to give my bags different shape and structure. And there's lots of different types of interfacing. I have a video up on my channel about it and how to use it, but it is a very handy thing to get your head around and to learn how to use. Lock stitch. Now you might be looking at getting a new sewing machine, or someone might be talking about a sewing machine and it says that it's a lock stitch machine. Now lock stitch just means when the thread comes from the top and then the thread comes from the bottom and they lock together to make a stitch. So my industrial machine that you see a lot on my channel is a lock stitch machine, which means that it just does that one stitch in a straight line really fast. It doesn't do zigzag or anything like that. So if you see, especially in industrial machines, if something says that it's a zigzag machine, then it does zigzag stitch, and usually that's all it'll do. And a lock stitch machine will just do lock stitch, just that straight stitch. Pleat. Now, I think most people would know what a pleat is. It's just a piece of fabric and you fold it over a little bit at the top and sew it down a little bit just to make a pleat, or make the fabric fall with that sort of grouping in it. In bag making, I've actually done a few pleat bags, and it just gives the whole piece of fabric a new shape and dimension, and it's just a really cool way to do bag making. And the last one is top stitching, isn't it? So top stitching is just that. It's where we stitch on top of the fabric. Now in bag making, you'll see me use it a lot. And I do it to add detail to bags, to finish off seams, to make the bag stronger, and just make bits lay flat and just look nice. So top stitching is literally just stitching on top of your fabric. Okay guys, that's it for today. I hope that was informative. Now, if you think that I missed anything important, and there's a lot that I missed, but if you think there's something that other people would benefit from knowing, then please drop a comment in the comment box and put a little explanation in there as well. Okay, that's it for us today. We're going to go play mousey fetch for a little while. And I can't clap because there's a cat in my arms. Clap. Can you clap? Tush. Bye. Bugger.